I could smell the roast chicken before I even reached the porch. That familiar scent, garlic, butter, rosemary, used to mean comfort. Tonight, it just made my stomach twist. My hands gripped the steering wheel for a second longer than they should have before I cut the engine. "Are we late?" Liam asked from the back seat, his voice cautious, like he already knew the answer might start a fight. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 5:17 p.m. "A little," I said, forcing a smile. "But Grandma won't mind." Sophie kicked her legs gently, her shiny shoes bumping against the seat. "Mom, do you think Aunt Olivia's bringing her chocolate cake again?" I hesitated. "Probably," I said. "Of course she is. Olivia never misses a chance to show off her baking skills." I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, a face that was still trying too hard. Lipstick too careful, hair pinned neatly, smile already cracking. I wanted this dinner to go right. I wanted peace. Maybe, just maybe, Mom would notice that I'd been working extra shifts, that I finally paid off the car, that I was doing fine. I wanted to believe love could still live in that house. We stepped onto the porch, the laughter already spilling through the front door. Olivia's laugh, the loud kind that fills every corner and leaves no space for anyone else's voice. Mom opened the door before I could knock. She looked me up and down like she was taking inventory. "You're late again," she said. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I know. Traffic," I murmured. Though the drive was only 15 minutes, she stepped aside to let us in, her tone clipped and brisk. "Shoes off, please." I just had the floor cleaned. The dining room was already glowing, candles lit, crystal glasses sparkling under the chandelier. Olivia sat in her usual seat beside Dad, wearing a cream sweater that somehow stayed spotless even around food. Her husband, Michael, laughed at something Dad said, his watch flashing gold every time he gestured. Their kids, Ethan and Lily, were sitting upright, napkins on their laps, like little porcelain dolls trained for display. And then there was the table. 8 chairs, 7 place settings. Mine was missing. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd just overlooked it. But no. No plate, no fork, no glass. Mom brushed past me, heading toward the kitchen. "Emma, could you help serve? Olivia's been chatting with your father all afternoon. I've been running around here by myself." Olivia turned, her face lighting up in mock surprise. "Oh, you made it," she said, as if my presence was an afterthought. "I said I would," I replied softly. She smiled that polished smile of hers. "Well, I just assumed you'd be tired. You work so much these days." There was that tone, sweet on the surface, sour underneath. "I'm fine," I said, slipping off my coat. Liam and Sophie stood awkwardly near the doorway until Olivia's kids gave them a polite wave, the kind children give to people they've been taught to pity. "Go sit," I told them gently, nudging them toward the far end of the table. When I walked into the kitchen, the smell hit harder. Roasted carrots, mashed potatoes, gravy bubbling on the stove. Mom moved quickly, efficiently, but her sighs were loud enough to be heard. "I just wish you'd told me you were running late," she muttered, scooping potatoes onto a platter. "Everything's about timing, Emma. Olivia's family has been here since 4. I bit the inside of my cheek. "I didn't know there was a schedule." She glanced at me sharply. "You always think I'm criticizing. I'm just saying, dinner works best when people are punctual." I said nothing. I carried the dishes to the table, balancing the chicken tray carefully. Olivia's eyes flicked over me as if to make sure I didn't drop anything. Her kids were already served juice in tall glasses. Mine still waited, hands folded, unsure if they could pour water themselves. "Let's eat before it gets cold," Dad said, smiling, but only at Olivia. Plates were passed down the line. Olivia served her children first, then her husband, then herself. Mom followed suit, nodding approvingly. By the time the bowls reached my end of the table, the chicken platter was half empty. "It's okay," I told Liam quietly, pushing a drumstick toward him. "Take it." He shook his head. "You haven't eaten, Mom." "I'm fine." Mom's voice cut through. "Emma, don't be dramatic. There's plenty, but there wasn't. Not really. I reached for the mashed potatoes, scraping the bottom of the dish. Sophie looked at me, eyes wide, then down at her empty plate. Olivia leaned back, sipping her wine. "You should have come earlier, Em. You know how fast these kids eat." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel in volume. It was cruel in its casualness. Like my family had rehearsed how to make me feel small without ever raising their voices. Mom looked at me then, her tone soft, but her words sharp. "You always were the sensitive one. Just eat, dear." And that's when I realized nothing had changed. All my years of trying, forgiving, showing up, none of it mattered. I wasn't here to be included. I was here to be reminded of my place after dinner. When everyone moved to the living room for dessert, I stayed back at the table, gathering plates. My missing setting still sat empty, untouched, unacknowledged. I stared at it for a long moment, that small, blank space at a crowded table. Then I quietly whispered to myself, so low that no one could hear. One day, I won't be sitting here at all. The scrape of silverware and the low hum of conversation filled the dining room. I moved between the kitchen and the table, carrying platters and bowls like a waitress in my own childhood home. I'd been doing it for so many years it had become muscle memory. Serve first, eat last, smile through it. "Emma, could you pass the gravy?" Mom asked without looking up. I set it down in front of Olivia's husband, who gave me a distracted thanks before turning back to Dad's story about the new golf course opening near their subdivision. Olivia's kids, Ethan and Lily, were already digging in. "Give them the drumsticks first," Mom said, motioning toward them. "They love the dark meat." I froze mid-step. My hand hovered over the platter, chicken glistening under the light. Liam's fork clinked softly against his empty plate. Sophie was staring at her folded napkin. I swallowed hard. "Sure," I said quietly, setting the drumsticks in front of Ethan and Lily. Olivia leaned over, dabbing her daughter's mouth with a napkin. "Say thank you to Aunt Emma, sweetheart," she said, her voice syrupy. Lily smiled sweetly. "Thank you, Aunt Emma." "You're welcome," I murmured. My throat felt tight. When I finally sat down, I realized there wasn't much left to serve. The mashed potatoes had been reduced to a thin smear. The chicken platter was mostly bones. Sophie whispered, "Mom, can I have some bread?" "Of course, honey," I said, reaching for the basket in the center of the table. Just as Liam stretched his hand toward it, Mom's voice snapped through the chatter like a whip. "Let the little ones eat first," she said sharply. "They're used to waiting." The words hit before I could process them. The room went quiet for a second. Not awkward quiet, but the kind that follows a command everyone understands. Liam's hand froze midair. He slowly pulled it back. "I wasn't—" he began, his voice small. Olivia laughed, not cruelly loud, but with that effortless superiority that made everything sting worse. She leaned back in her chair, eyes bright, lips curved. "Oh, Mom," she said, giggling. "Don't be so hard on them. They were born for crumbs anyway." The laughter that followed, hers, her husband's, even a soft chuckle from Dad, rolled through the room like a quiet, suffocating wave, born for crumbs. I felt it like a slap, not to my face, but to everything I'd tried to build. Every small moment of dignity. Every bedtime story I'd told my kids to remind them they were loved, even if we had little. Sophie looked at me, her eyes confused. Liam's jaw tightened, his gaze locked on his plate. For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. My pulse roared in my ears. Then I smiled. That tight, practiced smile I'd learned over years of swallowing pride. "It's fine," I said softly, though no one had asked if it was. "They'll be fine." Mom laughed lightly as if she'd missed the tension completely. "Emma always takes things too seriously." I wanted to stand, to gather my kids and leave. But I didn't, not yet. Instead, I watched them, both of them sitting straighter now, trying to hide their shame like I'd taught them to hide mine. The rest of the meal blurred into a quiet fog. Dad told a story about a neighbor's promotion. Olivia talked about Lily's piano recital. Mom nodded approvingly, occasionally glancing my way to remind me I should be listening. I wasn't. I was staring at Sophie's small hands, folded neatly in her lap, and at Liam, who picked at a crumb of chicken skin like it was something to do. The sound of forks scraping against plates became unbearable. When dessert came, Olivia's famous chocolate cake. Mom cut generous slices for her grandkids first. "Give the last piece to Lily," she said. "She plays so beautifully, she deserves it." There was one sliver left, a narrow strip of frosting and sponge, and she set it in front of Sophie. "There you go. Dear," Mom said, smiling like she'd done something kind. Sophie hesitated, then looked at me. "Eat it," I said softly. It was dry. I could tell from the way she chewed. I reached for my water glass and realized it was empty. No one noticed. "Emma," Olivia said suddenly, "you remember when Mom tried to teach us to bake and you burned the brownies?" She laughed. Mom joined in. "I was 12, I said, my tone even. "I know," she said, smiling wider. "But you were so sure you could do it. You always wanted to prove something." I stared at her, at the sister who'd never known what it was to wait, to work, to earn. My voice came out low. "I'm not proving anything anymore." She blinked. "What?" "Nothing," I said, standing up. "I'm just going to get some air." The room fell quiet for half a second before Olivia shrugged and turned back to her husband. I stepped outside, the cold evening air biting against my skin. From inside, laughter still carried faintly through the window, born for crumbs. I looked through the glass at my children, still sitting, still polite, still waiting for permission to stand. And something inside me shifted. Not a spark of anger, something heavier. A slow, final realization that this would never change. That I'd been feeding a ghost of love that no longer existed. I took a deep breath and whispered, "Not anymore." Then I turned the knob, stepped back inside, and started quietly gathering our coats. Sophie looked up at me, startled. "Mom?" "Get your things," I said gently. "Are we leaving?" Liam asked. "Yes," I said. "We've had enough dinner for one night." Emma chewed slowly, tasting nothing. The roast chicken, the mashed potatoes, the gravy, all of it turned to dust in her mouth. Across the table, Olivia's kids chattered about their private school awards, and her parents leaned in, delighted. Emma kept her eyes down, cutting her food into smaller and smaller pieces until her plate looked untouched. Liam nudged Sophie under the table, whispering something to make her smile. Emma caught that, his quiet attempt to keep the peace, and her heart twisted. Even her children were learning how to shrink themselves. "It's okay, Mom," Sophie whispered when their mother's voice rose again. Emma smiled faintly. "I know, sweetheart," but she didn't know. She didn't know how to explain why this always happened. Why every visit ended with her kids being treated like guests in a home that should have been theirs too. Her father poured Olivia another glass of wine and said, "You've done well for yourself, Liv. Not everyone can manage a household and career like you do." Olivia smirked. "It's not that hard if you know how to stay focused." She gave Emma a pointed glance. "Some of us just get distracted." Laughter rippled around the table. Emma's cheeks burned. She forced herself to sip water, to look unbothered. Her mother cleared plates from Olivia's side first, as always, and when Emma began stacking hers to help, Mom waved her off. "No, dear. I'll handle it. You'll just make a mess like last time?" The words landed heavier than intended. Emma froze, then slowly set the dishes down. She wanted to scream, to demand even an ounce of respect, but she didn't. Not this time. Not here. Her kids were watching. Instead, she straightened her back and smiled. "Of course, Mom." The dinner dragged on, conversation looping around promotions, renovations, and vacation homes. No one asked Emma about her job. No one asked about the new apartment she'd struggled to make a home. She sat there, invisible, holding the fragile shell of her composure like it might shatter at any second. When dessert came out, Olivia's kids got the first slices of pie. Her mother fussed over their whipped cream portions while Liam and Sophie waited quietly. Emma's stomach turned. She looked at her children's faces, patient, polite, and painfully accustomed to this routine. She pushed her plate aside. "We should be going," she said softly. Olivia glanced at the clock. "Already? We haven't even finished dessert." "Long drive," Emma replied. "School night," her mother frowned. "You always rush off." "Stay for coffee at least." Emma shook her head. "Next time." Her father muttered something about never finishing what she starts, and that nearly broke her. She gathered her things in silence. Liam and Sophie helped without being asked, slipping into their coats like they'd practiced it. At the door, her mother hugged Olivia tightly, then turned to Emma with a polite, stiff smile. "Drive safe, dear. You know how careless you can be at night." Emma bit her tongue so hard she tasted blood. "I'll be fine." Outside, the air was cool and damp. The porch light buzzed faintly above them. She opened the car door, ushered the kids in, and started the engine. No one spoke for the first few miles. The radio stayed off. The road stretched ahead, empty except for the rhythmic flash of streetlights. Emma gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles pale against the leather. Sophie fell asleep first, her head resting against the window. Liam sat quietly beside her, eyes unfocused, watching the blur of passing trees. "Mom?" he finally said. "Yes, baby." "Why does Grandma talk like that?" "About us?" Emma's throat tightened. She wanted to lie to protect him from the truth. But he was 10 now, old enough to see what she'd been trying to hide. "She doesn't understand," Emma said after a long pause. "Some people just don't see what's right in front of them." He nodded slowly, though she knew it didn't make sense. When they reached a red light, Emma glanced in the rearview mirror. Sophie's soft breathing, Liam's reflection staring back, eyes heavy with questions he didn't know how to ask. That's when something in her shifted. The humiliation, the exhaustion, the years of pretending it didn't matter, it all gathered into one clear thought. Not anymore. She whispered it to herself first, testing how it sounded in the quiet car. Then again, firmer this time. Not anymore. Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't crack. The light turned green, and she pressed her foot on the gas, not just driving home, but toward something new. Something that finally felt like hers. Emma used to believe that love was something you earned, that if you worked hard enough, forgave often enough, and stayed kind no matter what, people would eventually see your worth. Back then, she didn't know that some hearts only open for those they choose to see. It started long before the Sunday dinners, before the awkward smiles and quiet humiliations. It began in her 20s, the years she used to call her building years, though now she knew they were the forgetting years. When Olivia got engaged, their parents threw a garden party so extravagant the entire neighborhood talked about it for weeks. White tents, fairy lights, champagne fountains, even a string quartet. Their father gave a teary toast about how proud he was of his shining example of grace and success. Emma had stood near the edge of the lawn, holding a tray of appetizers because she'd volunteered to help when the caterer ran short-staffed. No one noticed, not even when her mother walked by and said quietly, "Try not to draw attention, dear. It's Olivia's day." A year later, when Emma got married, the event barely filled a small community hall. No music, no decorations beyond what her friend had arranged last minute. Her parents came, but only for the ceremony. Her mother had murmured, "It's such a shame your dress doesn't quite fit right, dear." Her father left early, saying he had an early morning meeting. When Emma looked back at her wedding photos years later, she realized something painful. There wasn't a single picture of her smiling without effort. Every grin was stretched thin, every gaze pleading for approval that never came. Olivia, meanwhile, posted her honeymoon photos in Paris, the same trip their parents had helped pay for. It became a pattern. Every Christmas, Olivia's children unwrapped piles of shiny boxes, gadgets, designer clothes, toys that cost more than Emma's monthly grocery bill. Emma's kids, Liam and Sophie, would unwrap envelopes that said, "We forgot. Sorry, next time." And still Emma told them to smile, to say thank you. "Maybe Grandma and Grandpa are just busy," she'd whisper. She wanted to believe that kindness, if given freely enough, would circle back one day. Then came the year her husband left. He packed his things in silence one night after dinner, leaving a note on the counter that said he couldn't carry the weight of her family's pity anymore. When she called her parents crying, her mother sighed. "Emma, you've always been too emotional. You drive people away," her father added. "You should have chosen better. You always do this, rush into things and expect us to clean it up." They didn't visit. They didn't offer help. When her rent was due and her fridge empty, Emma picked up extra shifts at the diner. Then she found part-time cleaning work at a small office downtown. Some nights she worked 16 hours straight. She'd come home past midnight, kiss her sleeping kids on the forehead, and promise silently that things would get better. And even then, even when she could barely afford gas, she'd send grocery bags to her parents' doorstep. Flour, milk, cooking oil, fruit. She told herself it was just to help, because that's what good daughters did. Her mother once called to say, "We didn't ask for this, you know. You should focus on your own kids." Emma had smiled softly, phone pressed to her ear. "I know, Mom. I just wanted to make things easier for you." The line went quiet. Then her mother changed the subject to Olivia's new car. Years blurred together after that. School lunches, overdue bills, quiet birthdays with homemade cakes. Her children grew, polite and patient, never asking why Grandma forgot their names in the family Christmas cards, or why Olivia's kids always seemed to come first. And Emma, she learned how to disappear without anyone noticing. She laughed when she was supposed to, smiled when she was hurting, and told everyone she was fine. But beneath it all, something in her hardened every time her mother forgot her birthday. Every time her father praised Olivia's responsibility. Every time she swallowed her pride instead of her pain. The kindness she kept giving, year after year, became less about love and more about survival. She gave because it was all she knew how to do, and still, she waited. Waited for her mother to say, "I'm proud of you." Waited for her father to see how strong she'd become. Waited for someone, anyone, to recognize the quiet power of her endurance. That day never came. By the time Liam turned 10 and Sophie 8, Emma's heart no longer expected anything from them. Only silence, only obligation, but she had changed, slowly, quietly, like steel forged in fire. Those forgotten years, the ones everyone overlooked, had built something in her that no one could take away anymore. Strength, resilience, and a quiet promise she didn't even know she'd made yet. That one day, she'd stop waiting for them to change. One day, they'd be the ones waiting for her. That night, after putting the kids to bed, Emma sat at the small kitchen table, the one with a faint burn mark from when Liam had tried to help make pancakes years ago. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the fridge and the occasional rustle of wind through the half-open window. She opened her laptop, the glow reflecting off her tired eyes. It wasn't bills or deadlines she was worried about this time. It was something deeper, something she hadn't allowed herself to face before. For years, she had been everyone's quiet provider. She clicked open her banking app. The familiar screen blinked to life, listing hundreds of small transactions, the breadcrumbs of her generosity. Her gaze drifted to one line. Transfer, $120, Dad's electricity bill. It was dated from 2 winters ago. She remembered the call, her father sounding frustrated. "We're a bit behind on utilities." "Just temporary. I'll pay you back next week." He never did. Then another one. Groceries Olivia. That one made her chest tighten. She could still picture standing in line at the supermarket, Olivia beside her, laughing into her phone. "Oh, I forgot my card again. You don't mind, do you, Em? I'll send it back later." Emma had smiled. "It's fine." It always was. She scrolled further, hundreds of similar entries. Little sacrifices that had never been acknowledged, never returned. $45 for Mom's prescription refill. $200 for Olivia's car repair, while she waited for payday. $80 for takeout the night her parents had guests and didn't want to cook. Each one was labeled as an act of love, as she used to call them. Now they felt like proof of a pattern, of how invisible she had been, even while holding everyone together. She leaned back in her chair, a deep sigh escaping her. How many times had she covered for them because she couldn't stand seeing them struggle? How many times had she chosen silence because it felt easier than confrontation? And how many times had they mistaken her kindness for weakness? Her mind wandered to the night her father's medication ran short. He'd called not to ask how she was, but to say, "Your mother's worried about my prescription. Can you cover it just this once?" She had said yes, of course. And he had replied with a simple, "Good girl, good girl." The words echoed bitterly now. They weren't praise, they were permission. Permission to keep giving, keep bending, keep sacrificing until there was nothing left of her. Emma closed her eyes for a moment. The fatigue that had been simmering for years finally rose to the surface. It wasn't just physical. It was emotional exhaustion from constantly being the reliable one, the one who patched every hole while no one noticed her bleeding hands. She rubbed her temples and opened a notepad beside her laptop. Slowly, she began writing down every transaction related to her family. One by one, it started as a list, then it became a ledger. By the time she was done, the total at the bottom made her heart pound. $84,765, almost $9,000. Money she could have saved, used for her kids, or just kept for peace of mind. Her hands trembled slightly as she stared at the number. $9,000, and not one thank you. She thought of her kids upstairs, sleeping soundly. How many times had she said no to them? No to a new backpack, no to a school trip, no to pizza night, because she was too busy saying yes to her parents and sister? Her jaw tightened. For the first time, she saw things clearly. She wasn't just the forgotten daughter. She was the one who kept the whole system running. Silently, invisibly. Her parents weren't dependent on Olivia. They were dependent on her. The realization didn't bring anger, not yet. It brought stillness. A cold, quiet understanding that something had to change. She closed her laptop and stared at her reflection in the dark window. Her voice came out steady, almost unfamiliar. No more loans. No more excuses. In that moment, Emma didn't feel small. She didn't feel like the burden they'd made her believe she was. She felt powerful, quietly, dangerously powerful, because she finally knew the truth. They hadn't loved her unconditionally. They had relied on her unconditionally, and the day she stopped giving, they'd finally realize what she was worth. The morning sunlight crept through the blinds, painting pale stripes across Emma's kitchen table. The air smelled faintly of coffee, the kind she brewed half asleep every morning before the kids woke up. But today she wasn't tired. She felt clear. She opened her purse to grab a pen, and something crinkled inside. Paper, old and worn. She reached in and pulled out a folded receipt, yellowed around the edges. The ink was faded, but the numbers were still legible. 3/12/46, groceries, January 2021. Her breath caught. She remembered that day. It had been a freezing January afternoon. Her mother had called, voice trembling with exaggerated urgency. "We're out of everything, Emma. I was going to shop, but your father isn't feeling well, and Olivia's busy. Can you pick up a few things?" "Of course, Mom." She had loaded her car with their favorite things, organic produce, imported cheese, that fancy brand of olive oil her mother refused to cook without. She hadn't bought anything for herself that day, not even milk. That same night, Olivia posted a photo online, a dinner spread with candles and champagne. "Family night," the caption had said. Emma hadn't been invited. She smoothed the receipt flat against the table now, the paper soft from being handled too many times. $312.46. It wasn't just a number, it was a symbol. Proof of how love had always been one-sided in her family. She pulled out her phone, snapped a picture of the receipt, and stared at it for a long time. Then, on a quiet impulse, she opened her notes app and typed beneath the photo, "Every crumb you left, I paid for." The words looked strange on the screen. Small, almost fragile. but they carried a weight that shook her to her core. She saved the image. Not to post, not to share, but to remember. It was no longer about revenge. It was about acknowledgement, about reclaiming the truth she'd buried under years of forced smiles and "it's okay" replies. Emma took a slow sip of her coffee. The bitterness tasted good, honest. Her son Liam shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, Mom." "Morning, sweetheart," she said softly, forcing a smile. He sat at the table, watching her. "You okay?" "Yeah," she said. "Actually, better than okay." He nodded slowly, sensing the shift even if he didn't understand it. Kids always knew. Sophie came in next, dragging her blanket behind her. Emma poured them both cereal and sat across from them, just watching. The two faces that made every sacrifice worth it. The two reasons she'd endured the pain for so long. She thought about what her mother had said the night before. They're used to waiting. Maybe they were. But not anymore. Emma reached for her planner, something she hadn't touched in months. She flipped to a clean page and wrote at the top, "For us." Below it, she listed small things she'd been putting off. Enroll Sophie in art classes. Take Liam to the science museum. Fix the leak in the kitchen ceiling. Stop sending extra groceries to Mom. She paused after the last one, pen hovering. Then she underlined it twice. Her entire life had revolved around proving her worth, to a mother who never saw her, a father who stayed silent, and a sister who fed off the praise she was never questioned for. But now Emma didn't want their approval. She wanted her peace. Later that afternoon, she went to the small box she kept in her closet, a place where she'd tucked away little fragments of her past, birthday cards, bills, old letters. She added the folded receipt to it. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was her line in the sand. As she closed the box, she whispered, "Never again." The next day, her mother texted as if on cue. "Mom, Olivia's planning a family dinner this weekend. Bring the kids. I'll need you to pick up dessert again, dear." Emma stared at the screen. A month ago, she would have said yes without hesitation, out of duty, guilt, or maybe just habit. But now, she typed back slowly, "Emma, will come if invited. But I won't be bringing anything, no emoji, no explanation. Just truth." The message was small, but it was her first act of defiance. Minutes later, her mother replied, "Mom, that's not the tone I expect from you." Emma smiled faintly. "Exactly." She turned off her phone and walked to the window, where sunlight streamed through the glass. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of rain, the promise of something new. The receipt still sat on her desk, photo saved and words beneath it glowing faintly on the screen. "Every crumb you left, I paid for." For years she had been buying their comfort with her silence. But not anymore. This time she wouldn't raise her voice. She would raise her boundaries, and that, quietly, gracefully, would be enough to shake the entire table. The first test came sooner than Emma expected. It was a Tuesday afternoon, gray and quiet, when her phone buzzed with a familiar name. "Mom, can you transfer $200 for Olivia's kids' school trip? She's short this month." Emma stared at the message for a long moment. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. Once upon a time, she would have replied instantly. She would have told herself it was just this once, even though once had turned into 100 times. This time, she simply typed back, "Emma. Sorry, can't this time." No emoji. No apology. She set the phone down, heart pounding as though she'd just said something dangerous. But she hadn't yelled. She hadn't accused. She'd just stopped giving, and somehow that felt like the loudest thing she'd ever done. Minutes passed. The phone stayed silent. She waited for the usual follow-up. The guilt trip, the long sighs, the reminders of family duty. But nothing came. Just silence. Cold, thick silence that hummed through her kitchen like static. Liam came in from the yard, holding a paper airplane. "Mom, can I show you something?" She turned, smiling. Always. He launched the plane across the room. It landed perfectly on the counter. He grinned wide, the way only 10-year-olds can. See, straight flight. Emma laughed softly, genuine this time. Perfect. As she watched him, she realized something. This was where her energy belonged. Not in endless family rescues. Not in trying to earn love that came with conditions. Her kids never asked her to prove herself. They just loved her, unfiltered and real. That night, she cooked pasta with extra garlic, Sophie's favorite, and let herself feel the quiet peace of a dinner where no one compared, no one ranked. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was safe, but peace never lasted long in her family. 3 days later, her phone buzzed again. This time, the family group chat. The one she never muted even when she wanted to. Olivia. Wow, since when did you become selfish? Mom. Don't forget who raised you. Dad. Let's not start drama here. Emma read the thread in disbelief. One small no had set the house of cards trembling. Her fingers hovered over the screen. For a split second, she imagined typing paragraphs, listing every time she'd helped, every bill she'd paid, every errand she'd run. But then she saw the image in her mind, that faded grocery receipt, the one that said it all. She didn't owe them proof. She didn't owe them anything. Instead, she pressed and held the chat name. Tapped Leave Group. A soft notification blinked. You have left the conversation. She stared at those words for a long moment. It didn't feel rebellious, it felt clean, like exhaling after holding her breath for years. Later that evening, as the rain began to tap against the windows, Emma sat on her couch with a blanket wrapped around her legs. Her phone lay face down on the coffee table, buzzing occasionally. Then quieting again, she didn't check. Instead, she opened her laptop and began organizing her finances, closing shared accounts, canceling auto payments she'd set up for her parents years ago. Each click was a small liberation, she whispered under her breath. You don't get to take from me anymore. Outside, thunder rolled across the distance, not loud, but low and steady, like the sound of something shifting. Liam wandered into the living room and curled beside her. Mom? Yeah, baby? Grandma texted me today. She said you're mad at everyone. Emma's throat tightened. What did you tell her? He shrugged. I told her you're not mad. You're just tired. She smiled, tears gathering behind her eyes. That's a good answer. Sophie joined them, dragging her favorite blanket, climbing onto Emma's lap as if she'd been doing it her whole life. Which she had. Are we still going to Grandma's next Sunday? Sophie asked sleepily. Emma brushed her daughter's hair back. No, honey. Not this time. Why? Because sometimes, she said softly, you have to stop going places that make you feel small. Neither child said anything more. They didn't protest. They just leaned against her, trusting her warmth more than any explanation. The rain kept falling, steady and rhythmic. In the glow of the lamp, Emma picked up her phone again. She scrolled through her messages one last time, past the guilt, the expectations, the years of just help out this once. Then she opened a new note and typed a single sentence. Saying no doesn't make me selfish. It makes me free. She closed her eyes and breathed it in. For the first time in her life, Emma wasn't trying to be a good daughter. She was finally being a good mother, and that, she realized, was the truest act of revenge. Mom's voice on the phone was cold and clipped. We need to talk. Sunday. Family meeting. Everyone will be there, I almost laughed. A family meeting. The last time we had one, it was about Olivia's baby shower budget, and I was told to just bring the cake. But I said, okay, calm, even curious. Because for once, I wasn't walking in as the quiet helper. I was walking in as someone who finally understood her own worth. Sunday came like a storm you know is coming but can't quite feel until it's over your head. The dining room looked the same. Heavy curtains, polished table, old family photos where Olivia always stood front and center. Mom was already seated, arms folded. Dad sat beside her, pretending to read a newspaper he wasn't actually looking at. Olivia was scrolling on her phone, smiling smugly when she saw me. "Oh, you made it," she said. "Of course," I replied. "You said it was important. Mom didn't waste time. We've noticed you've been distant lately. No calls. No help when your sister needed it. This family needs cooperation, Emma." There it was. That word again. Cooperation. The one they used every time they needed my money, my time, my silence. I just nodded and reached into my bag. No anger, no shaking hands. Just quiet, deliberate movement. I pulled out my phone and opened the gallery. One by one, I placed it on the table and turned the screen toward them, scrolling slowly through screenshots and photos. First, a transfer of $200 to Olivia, captioned, "Forgot my card again." Then, a receipt for Dad's medication. I'd the electricity bill from 2 winters ago. Groceries, $312.46. Mom's handwriting at the bottom, "Pay you back soon." Their eyes shifted, but I kept going. "I've carried this family quietly for 10 years, I said, my voice steady. "And you still think I'm the selfish one?" Mom opened her mouth, maybe to defend herself, maybe to scold, but no words came. Dad looked down. Olivia crossed her arms, muttering, "You don't have to throw everything in our faces." I looked straight at her. "You're right. I don't. That's why I never did, until now." The silence that followed was heavy. You could almost hear the weight of all the unspoken things. All the dinners I missed because I was working. All the times I covered bills. All the times they laughed while I stayed home with tired eyes and grocery lists. "You were supposed to be the good one," Mom finally said, voice trembling with something between guilt and anger. "And you were supposed to be the kind one," I replied softly. "Not the one who watched me struggle. No yelling, no tears. Just truth." I stood up, collected my phone, and looked around the table. The same one I used to serve food on, used to clean after everyone finished eating. "This is the last time I explain myself," I said. "You've already seen everything you needed to." I turned to leave, and as I reached the door, Olivia muttered under her breath, "You'll come back." "You always do." I didn't even turn around. Not this time. Outside, the evening air felt sharp but clean. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking away feeling small. I was walking away free. That old receipt in my purse, the one that said $312.46, felt lighter somehow. Because now I knew what it really cost me. Not money, peace, and I was done paying. For a few seconds after my words, nobody spoke. The room was still, like even the air had stopped to listen. Then Olivia broke it, her voice sharp and dripping with disbelief. "You're exaggerating, Emma. It's not like you paid for everything." "You're being dramatic again." Again. That word. It had followed me my whole life, every time I cried, every time I tried to explain how they made me feel. Dramatic. Emotional. Sensitive. But this time it didn't sting. It just sounded small. I turned slowly toward her. "Really?" I said softly. "Then maybe you can tell me, who paid for Dad's medicine last winter?" Dad froze. His eyes dropped to the table. His hand clenched the edge of his chair, but he said nothing. Mom looked at him, waiting for him to speak. He didn't, because he couldn't. And that silence, that was my answer. I took a slow breath, stood up, and pushed my chair back. The sound echoed in the room, louder than anyone's voice. "I'm done," I said quietly. "You'll have to manage on your own now." Mom frowned, her voice rising with that old authority she thought still worked. "Don't talk back to me, young lady." I met her eyes, steady and unshaken. "It's not talking back," I said. "It's standing up." Something flickered across her face. Confusion, maybe fear, maybe realization. For the first time, she saw me not as the helper, not as the quiet one, but as someone who finally meant what she said. From the corner of my eye, I saw them. My kids, standing by the doorway. They'd been quiet the whole time, watching everything. Their eyes were wide, unsure, but proud. My daughter's fingers were laced with her brother's, both clutching each other like witnesses to something they'd never seen before. Their mother, strong. Their mother, not apologizing. I smiled gently at them. That smile wasn't for my parents. It was for them, because I wanted them to remember this moment, the one where I stopped begging for respect and started demanding it by action. Mom tried one last time. "After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" I turned toward her slowly. "All you've done?" I took a step closer. "You mean the birthdays you skipped? The times you told me to figure it out? Or the Christmases where my kids got nothing while you showered Olivia's with gifts?" Her lips trembled, but she didn't answer. Olivia looked away, pretending to text. Dad just kept staring at his hands. No one had anything left to say, not because I shouted them down, but because the truth didn't need to be shouted. I reached for my coat. "I hope someday you realize what I was trying to do all those years," I said softly. "But until then, I'm done trying to prove my worth to people who never saw it." Olivia scoffed quietly, but even she sounded unsure this time. "You'll come back when you need something," she muttered. I slipped on my coat, met her eyes one last time. "The only thing I needed," I said, "was peace. And I've already found it." As I stepped outside, the wind hit my face. Cold, clean, honest. Behind me, I heard muffled voices starting again, but I didn't turn back. My kids ran up beside me. My son asked softly, "Mom, are we okay?" I knelt down and smiled. "We're better than okay," I said. "We're free." He smiled back, and my daughter wrapped her arms around me. We walked to the car together, no yelling, no guilt, just quiet strength. And as I started the engine, I realized something. The silence that once broke me was now the silence that healed me. Weeks passed. No messages, no calls. The silence that once haunted me had turned into something else. A kind of peace that didn't need anyone's permission. At first, I kept checking my phone, half expecting my mother's name to appear, or Olivia's endless group chat notifications to buzz again. Nothing. Just quiet. And slowly, that quiet became comforting. I stopped expecting an apology that was never coming. The house felt different now. Not bigger, not smaller, just ours. No more waiting for approval. No more pretending that being the good daughter was worth the cost of my dignity. On Saturday mornings, the kids and I made pancakes together. Sophie mixed the batter, leaving streaks of flour on the counter. Liam flipped them too early, burning the edges, then laughed so hard he nearly dropped the pan. And I didn't scold him. I laughed too, because it was messy, imperfect, and real, that laughter. It filled the empty spaces my family's coldness had left behind. One evening, as the sunset poured gold through the windows, Liam came up to me holding a drawing. It was of the three of us, me, him, and Sophie, standing together in front of our little house. He'd written on top in uneven letters, "Our family." I felt something catch in my chest. I looked at him, at his shy smile, and asked, "Why did you draw this?" He shrugged. "Because now we're happy. You don't cry after dinner anymore." I couldn't speak for a moment, so I just pulled him close and whispered, "Thank you, baby." He hugged me tighter. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm proud of you." Those words, simple, soft, from a 10-year-old, healed more than any apology ever could. That night, Sophie helped me set the table. 3 plates, 3 glasses, 3 forks, all equal. No special seats, no they eat first. She carefully placed the napkins and smiled. "Is this okay, Mommy?" I looked at the table, at the perfectly ordinary sight that once felt impossible, and nodded. "It's perfect." We sat down. The food was simple: pasta, garlic bread, a little salad. But when I took the first bite, something inside me shifted. It wasn't about the taste. It was about the moment, the stillness, the warmth, the way my kids' laughter filled the air. For the first time in years, I didn't feel hungry for something more. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel less than. I felt full. After dinner, we sat together on the couch, a movie playing softly in the background. Sophie leaned against my shoulder. Liam fell asleep halfway through, his head in my lap. I brushed a hand through his hair and thought, maybe this was always the point. Not revenge, not proving them wrong, just finding peace where love actually lived. And that night, as I turned off the lights and tucked my kids into bed, I whispered the same words I'd promised myself weeks ago. Not anymore. But this time it didn't sound like defiance. It sounded like freedom. It was a Wednesday evening when someone knocked on my door. The sound startled me. I wasn't used to unexpected visitors anymore. When I opened it, Mrs. Keller from next door stood there, holding a large pot wrapped in a kitchen towel. Her gray hair was tied back, her cheeks pink from the cold. "I made too much stew," she said, smiling softly. "Thought you and the kids might like some." For a second, I couldn't move. It wasn't the stew. It was the gesture. Someone had thought of me. "Thank you," I managed to whisper, my throat tight. She handed it over, and I could smell the warmth. Carrots, onions, slow-cooked comfort. And before I knew it, my eyes blurred. Mrs. Keller tilted her head. "Are you all right, dear?" I laughed, a shaky, embarrassed laugh. "Yes, it's been a while since anyone's brought me food." She smiled gently, understanding more than words could say. "Well," she said, "everyone deserves to be fed with kindness sometimes." That evening, I ladled the stew into bowls for Liam, Sophie, and me. Steam rose into the dim kitchen light. It wasn't fancy, but it tasted like something I hadn't felt in a long time. Care. As Sophie ate, she grinned. "This is good, Mommy. Way better than ours." I smiled. She was right. It was better, not because of the ingredients, but because it came from someone's heart, not obligation. After dinner, when the kids went to bed, I sat at the table with the empty bowl in front of me. I ran my thumb along the rim and felt something stir, a soft ache but not painful. More like remembering what it means to be human again. The next morning, I found an old notebook in the back of my dresser, the one I used to write in before life got too loud. The first page was dated 8 years ago. Back then, my entries were about hope. New jobs, dreams, recipes, small things that made me smile. Then the pages turned darker. Apologies to myself I never said out loud. I'm sorry for not being enough. I'm sorry for still trying. I flipped to a clean page and wrote slowly, deliberately. Today, someone brought me stew. It felt like being seen. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Days turned into weeks, and something inside me shifted. I started taking short walks after dropping the kids at school. Just around the block, enough to feel the wind again. To remind myself there was a world outside the ache I'd lived in. I noticed things I'd forgotten how to see. The way the sun touched the rooftops, the smell of freshly baked bread from the corner store, the sound of laughter spilling from someone else's porch. It didn't feel like envy anymore. It felt like possibility. Sometimes Mrs. Keller would wave from her garden, and I'd wave back. Once she handed me a clipping of daisies. "Plant them," she said. "They don't ask for much, just a bit of sun and care." I planted them by the window. Each morning, I'd water them while the coffee brewed. The first bloom opened on a Tuesday, small, white, imperfect, and I smiled, because that's what healing looked like for me now. Tiny acts. Warm stew, fresh air, and the courage to write one more line every night. I no longer waited for my family's messages. I no longer reread old ones either. Instead, I filled my journal with new memories, meals cooked, drawings from the kids, things that made me grateful. And for the first time in years, when I looked at my reflection in the kitchen window, I didn't see the woman who'd been left out. I saw the woman who finally came home, to herself. For years, I believed love meant enduring everything quietly, even when it hurt, even when it was humiliating, even when the people who were supposed to cherish you treated you like leftovers. I remember sitting at that table, watching my kids on the floor with paper plates while Olivia's family ate first. I thought love meant swallowing my pride and pretending it didn't matter. But it does matter. And I finally knew that. Love can also mean leaving the table that starves you. Love can mean feeding your own soul first. It started small. A few months after the last family meeting, I decided to try something I'd dreamed of for years. Cooking had always been my refuge, my way of showing care when words failed. So I started a little catering service from our kitchen, Second Helping. The name made me smile every time I said it aloud, because that's exactly what it was. Taking what was left behind, the scraps, the forgotten bits, and turning them into something nourishing. I cooked for neighbors, for small events, for kids' birthdays. Every dish carried a story, every meal had meaning, and every time I plated something, my kids were there, my little sous chefs. Liam chopped vegetables carefully, pretending he was a professional chef. Sophie stirred sauces with wide-eyed concentration, tasting along the way and insisting on her own perfect seasoning. They laughed when things spilled, sang along to songs on the kitchen radio, and reminded me why I had stopped giving away my energy to people who never valued it. Business grew slowly, quietly, beautifully. People loved the care I put into each meal, the flavors, the warmth, the attention to detail. And I loved it back, but it wasn't just the cooking. It was the act itself, creating something from what others left behind. From the crumbs, the scraps, the ignored, I was taking years of disappointment, small betrayals, and invisible labor, and turning it into sustenance, literal and emotional. One evening, after a long day, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. The kids ran barefoot in the yard, their laughter carrying across the quiet street. I thought of my parents, of Olivia, of all the meals I'd served, all the bills I'd paid, all the love I'd given that went unnoticed, and I smiled, because I wasn't bitter anymore. I wasn't small anymore, I was full. Sometimes I still think about the old dining room, the one where they told my children they were born for crumbs. But it doesn't hurt the way it used to. That table, that house, that family. They left me something after all. They left me experience. They left me resilience. They left me the understanding that the love I give must be reciprocated, not taken for granted. And from those leftovers, I built something better. Liam came running to me, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked from the garden. "For you, Mom. For everything you do for us." Sophie tugged at my apron, her hands smudged with flour, her eyes shining. "I helped too, Mommy, see? I chopped the carrots." I knelt down, laughing softly, brushing flour from her hair. "I see," I said. "And I love it. All of it." And for the first time in years, I felt complete. Not because of anyone else. Not because I'd earned approval. Not because I'd finally made them notice, but because I had noticed myself. I had cared for myself. Every plate I serve carries a little piece of that journey. A sprinkle of resilience, a dash of dignity, a generous helping of love that is recognized and returned. People often ask me why I named the business Second Helping. I tell them quietly with a smile, because sometimes you take what others leave behind, and you turn it into something better. The kids nod. They understand in their own way. And in that kitchen with laughter, light, and warmth all around, I finally know. I've built a life worth savoring. And when I close the kitchen door at night, when the dishes are washed and the lights are dimmed, I whisper to myself, maybe love was never the meal, just the crumbs they threw my way. I finally stopped eating, and I don't need anyone else to tell me I'm full. Months had passed since the last family meeting. Life had settled into a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. Quiet, steady, warm. The kids laughed over homework. Liam correcting Sophie's math mistakes with exaggerated seriousness. Sophie retaliating with a smudge of marker on his arm. I brewed tea, listening to their chatter, feeling a fullness I had never known before. Then my phone buzzed on the counter. A text from my mother. "Come to dinner." "Let's talk." I stared at the screen for a long moment. My thumb hovered over reply, and then I put the phone down. I smiled, not because I didn't care. Not because I wanted to punish her. but because I realized I didn't need to answer. Not anymore. That night, the house smelled like roasted chicken and garlic bread. Simple, comforting, familiar. I called the kids to the table. "Dinner's ready," I said, trying to make my voice sound as bright as possible. They ran in, giggling, and I placed full plates in front of them. No crumbs, no special treatment. Just equal portions for all. Liam looked up at me. "Mom, this smells amazing." Sophie's eyes sparkled. "Can I try the bread first?" I laughed. "Of course, sweetie. You go ahead." We sat down together. The room was warm with laughter and the clatter of forks. I watched my children eat with delight, trading bites, teasing each other, sharing jokes I hadn't heard them share with anyone else. It hit me then. This was what family should feel like. Not favoritism, not hierarchy, not judgment. I poured myself a glass of water and took a slow sip. I felt content, whole, finally full. After dinner, I cleared the table with their help, folding napkins, scraping plates, tidying the kitchen. The house hummed with life, but it was different from the chaos I had once endured. It was our life, our rhythm. Liam leaned against me as we washed the last dishes together. "Mom, I love our dinners," he said softly. Sophie hugged my waist. "Me too," she whispered. And in that moment, I understood something I had spent decades learning. Love isn't measured by who gets the biggest slice or the first serving. Love isn't earned by sacrifice alone. Love is in presence, in fairness, in being seen. I sat on the couch later, writing in my journal. The words flowed easily, unblocked by fear or doubt. Maybe love was never the meal, just the crumbs they threw my way. I finally stopped eating. I read the line twice. The second time, I smiled wider. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't angry. It was complete. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. A car drove by, headlights casting brief shadows on the walls. I didn't think of my mother's text again. I didn't wonder if she would ever understand, because understanding wasn't necessary. What mattered was this: the life I was building, the joy I was cultivating, the love that no longer demanded apology or approval. I poured myself another cup of tea and looked out the window at the darkened street. The stars were faint but visible, small points of light that reminded me of persistence, of resilience, of quiet beauty. In the kitchen, I started preparing tomorrow's breakfast with the kids' help, chopping vegetables, stirring batter, setting plates. Laughter spilled over into the hallway. I felt proud, not just for the meals, but for the life we had created together. A life built from patience, courage, and the crumbs of my past that I had transformed into sustenance for the future. And I realized something. The table is mine now. The kitchen is mine. The joy is mine. No leftovers, no crumbs. Just fullness finally, after years of quiet endurance. I watched Liam and Sophie drift off to bed that night, their small breathing rhythms even and content. I tucked them in, kissed their foreheads, and whispered the truth I had learned over the years. You deserve everything. Never settle for scraps. I turned off the lights and walked into the living room. Sitting on the couch, I held my journal to my chest, feeling its weight, a testament to the journey I had taken, the silence I had broken, the strength I had discovered. The phone buzzed again. Another message. From my mother. I didn't look. I didn't need to, because I was no longer hungry for their recognition. I was nourished in ways they never could have given. And in the quiet, as the house settled into night, I spoke to myself, softly, firmly, finally free. Maybe love was never the meal, just the crumbs they threw my way. I finally stopped eating. The words lingered, an echo in the stillness, a reminder, a declaration, and a promise to myself, always.